Hello and welcome back to the Data Privacy Lawyer. Today's review, we're going to be looking at some AI terms for this organization. This is effective September 30, 2025. So this is a legally binding document. JetBrains AI is a service that allows you to improve your use of certain products by connecting them to large language models provided by JetBrains directly or in partnership with third parties. The large language model used by JetBrains AI generates outputs and suggestions whose accuracy and suitability for a given situation or application must be confirmed by the users of JetBrains AI. So the fact that there are going to be users indicates that there's at least some personal data, right? At least a username and password at a minimum. Let's take a look. Okay, I like the definitions. Let's look at data. Data means any of your data that is transferred to or processed by. I talked a lot about processed, and I've seen this as a recurring theme. More and more organizations are recognizing that process is an all-encompassing, broad terminology that covers any operation or set of operations on personal data. Now, what we're not clear on is all of the data that's in scope. This is something that JetBrains has to determine on how their AI is utilized, but I'm pretty sure there's going to be restrictions on how a customer can input certain data. You'll recognize that when you're using some AI, sometimes you'll put an input or a prompt into the AI and you'll get a response that says, I can't respond to this, or I don't give an answer to this. On the back end, what's happened is the provider of the AI has put into place some restrictions on what type of data can be inputted because they don't want to be responsible for whatever the output is or processing the information that's been inputted. So you'll oftentimes get a response that says, oh, we can't respond to that, or I can't give you an answer on that. And the reason being is because what is allowed to be processed has been fine-tuned by the provider of the AI. And it's really important to note that. And in a lot of these terms, there will be restrictions on what data can be inputted and what cannot. Let's talk about on the customer side. It's important for the customer because you're ultimately responsible for your data as a data controller. So whatever you're choosing to input, you're still responsible for on the back end and maintaining your own legal obligations under the data privacy laws. From the provider side, it's important because they're a processor. They also have obligations. Whatever side you are on the equation or discussion of obtaining a service, you have data protection obligations. And if you are a processor and you want to minimize the risk associated with processing certain identifiers, you can put in place restrictions on how the AI can even be used, and then also what the customer is able to input into your solution. So this definition is really important. It definitely will cover personal data, even if it is at a minimum the information that a user uses to access the AI solution. So that's really important. I love the creation of the documentation. This is really important when it comes to artificial intelligence because it gives the customer the opportunity to conduct their own due diligence prior to engaging a particular service provider. And what generally happens, and as part of any business's privacy program, there's a component of your privacy program that should look at vendor due diligence. In this instance, if you're engaging with JetBrains, they are going to be a vendor to you. You should do due diligence before you engage with them. And as part of that due diligence process, you should look at any technical documentation that they provide you in order to decide if this is the vendor that you want to go with. One recurring thing that I've been seeing amongst AI providers is the discussion on training their AI model or solution on data that's inputted by customers. If you are a business and you're looking to work with a specific AI provider, you should definitely be looking at the technical documentation for clues on whether that's something that's applicable to your use of the service, because it impacts your obligations under the data protection laws depending on the geographies where you process personal data and then also where the service provider processes personal data. That's really important. Some countries and some geographies have more relaxed data protection laws than in other geographies. It's not only your responsibility to know that as a business, but also the service providers too. Everybody is looking at what their responsibility is, and that needs to be incorporated into any terms that are agreed on between yourself and a provider. Input means any instruction, source code snippet, text, or other information sent by you or your users to JetBrains AI. So essentially, the reason why it's really important to look at AI terms as a privacy counsel is because it influences the privacy program documentation that you have as a customer. It also influences the privacy program documentation of your service provider, because businesses rely on their service providers to move forward their own business. How your service provider treats personal data impacts you in a unique way, and you have to be very cognizant of that, and you need to be able to account for it in your own privacy practices. How your service provider treats personal data is definitely going to be conveyed on your privacy notice, because your privacy notice is something you place on your website, right? You're telling your customers this is how we treat personal data. How you treat personal data is influenced by how your third party or your service provider treats personal data too. You can't convey that to your customers on your website if you don't know what your practices are that are influenced by a third party. Now, I know that was a really long explanation, but essentially, your privacy practices are influenced by your third party or service provider's privacy practices. You need to make sure that you are engaging with the correct service provider, and you are able to be privy to that by looking at their documentation. User means any employee, independent contractor, or other individual who obtains access to the JetBrains AI under your subscription. So taking a look at the service that they're going to be providing you will influence the terms of service. What a lot of companies do and are doing is they are making it easier for businesses to conduct due diligence. And due diligence is a really important component of the contracting lifecycle one, and then also the vendor and third-party risk management that a business should do as part of its privacy program. If it's placed on the public-facing website, you don't have to request it from the entity prior to engaging with them. And it's really important to engage your privacy counsel if you're going to be providing personal data to any third party, because they'll help you with evaluation of risk. We're always looking at risk when we're looking at privacy, and we're also looking at compliance with the data protection laws. There are certain things you must do as a business. Now, whether or not your service provider cares about your obligations, you're going to be able to uncover that during the due diligence process. So that's why we've been looking at the AI terms on this channel, because third parties influence the level of risk that a business is willing to take on from a data protection standpoint. Users, creating and maintaining a JetBrains account and the permissions you grant to your users and your users' actions. Omissions while using JetBrains AI. If you become aware that any user breaches these terms, you must notify us and immediately revoke that user's access to JetBrains AI. Let's take a look at this on a last note. Your inputs and your data. Deciding on which inputs and files containing your data will be submitted to, accessible by, or stored in JetBrains AI. You are also responsible for all legal consequences such as claims, damages, losses, liabilities, costs, and expenses that result from your inputs. I'll make a note of this. There's something that every business should have in response to its privacy program. It's called a record of processing activity. I've talked about this on my podcast if you'd like to take a look at the discussion that I've had about record of processing activity. But essentially, it looks at any time your business conducts a processing activity, so any operational set of operations you use in relation to your business operations. I'll give you an example. An entry into your ROPA might say, we conduct a marketing campaign through our website. You are processing personal data in relation to that marketing campaign, so you make it as an entry in your ROPA. This is really important for you as a customer or a business in maintaining your compliance, because if you don't know how you're processing personal data, whether it's you're inputting it into a solution offered by a third party, how can you account for it and maintain responsibility without understanding how you process personal data for yourself as a business? And JetBrains is basically putting that responsibility on you and making sure that you understand how you process personal data, because you're responsible for the legal consequences associated from your inputs and your usage of their tool. Now, there's so much that I could talk about when it comes to privacy compliance, but I do think it's important for you to recognize that signing up for terms of service is not as easy as just signing some terms. You have to look at your own privacy program before you agree to any terms from a service provider, because they do impact you, whether negatively or positively, depending on the posture of your own privacy program. So I really hope you enjoyed this particular review. If you like this type of content and you're also interested in data protection, how it impacts businesses, business obligations, etc., subscribe to my channel and I'll see you in another review.